Hey viewers, welcome back to Hidden Truths, true crime stories, where we uncover the darkest secrets hiding behind ordinary lives. Here, every story is a window into betrayal, obsession, and the chilling truths people try to hide. Until now. Today's story is shocking and heartbreaking, an affair that destroyed two families and put one innocent life in danger. Secrets, lies, and obsession collide in a way you won't believe. And it all starts tonight. So buckle up, because this is the story of the affair that destroyed two families and one innocent life. Let's begin. Maplewood was a town that wore its calm like armor. Every street gleamed with freshly painted houses, manicured lawns, and streetlights that flickered with punctuality. To outsiders, it seemed the epitome of small-town American perfection. For James and Rachel Whitmore, it appeared exactly that way. James, a rising star in a mid-sized law firm, had a reputation for intelligence and composure. Rachel, with her effortless charm and warm smile, was the ideal mother to their 12-year-old daughter, Lily. Friends often said, "You two are the couple everyone aspires to be." And for years, the Whitmores had believed it themselves. That Tuesday evening, the Whitmore household hummed with normalcy. The smell of roasted chicken lingered in the kitchen, and Lily's laughter echoed from the hallway as she finished her homework. James, sprawled on the living room couch, scrolled through emails, occasionally glancing up at the muted television. Rachel tucked Lily into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Sweet dreams, baby." It was routine, comforting, almost sacred. But underneath the domestic tranquility, a tension had begun to coil like a snake, unseen yet dangerously close to striking. It started with a phone call. Rachel had just placed her cell phone on the kitchen counter when it buzzed insistently. The number was unfamiliar, but something in her gut made her hesitate. When she answered, a man's voice, low and urgent, whispered her name. For a moment, the kitchen seemed to shrink. The voice was distant yet intimate, familiar enough to awaken long-buried memories. "Rachel," he said, "we need to talk. It's about everything you think you've left behind." Her heart began to race, an icy fear mingling with a spark of forbidden curiosity. James, noticing her sudden paleness, asked if she was okay. She smiled, forcing casualness she did not feel. "Just a wrong number," she lied, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. After hanging up, she leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. She had hoped the past, the one she had buried during college, had truly ended. Michael, the man on the other end of the line. She had escaped his intensity, his obsession, and yet, here he was, uninvited and unrelenting. Rachel's mind raced through memories she had long suppressed. Stolen glances in library corridors, whispered confessions in rainy parking lots, moments that had seemed thrilling at the time, but now carried the weight of potential destruction. She realized that she could not ignore the gravity of his call. Something about it felt more like a warning than a request. The night settled in with an oppressive heaviness. The street outside was silent, the kind of quiet that amplifies a heartbeat, that magnifies unease. Rachel stared out the window, imagining Michael walking the darkened streets of Maplewood, plotting, remembering, waiting. The life she had meticulously built, a husband she loved, a daughter she adored, the image of perfection she displayed to friends and neighbors, suddenly felt fragile, like a house of cards poised to collapse at the slightest breath of wind. And as she finally went to bed, unable to sleep, a gnawing dread settled deep in her chest. The Whitmores' perfect life had been irreversibly shaken, though they didn't yet realize it. Somewhere beyond the cozy street lights and silent lawns, the past was creeping back in, ready to turn their carefully ordered world into chaos. Rachel's eyes widened as she noticed a text on her phone from the same unknown number. "I know everything about your perfect little life." The days after the first call felt like walking through fog. Rachel moved through her routine mechanically, preparing breakfast, driving Lily to school, attending book club meetings, all while a storm brewed silently in her chest. Every sound of her phone made her jump. Every knock on the door made her tense. She tried to convince herself that Michael's call was a momentary lapse in her past, an echo from a life long gone. But when the same number texted her repeatedly, each message more invasive than the last, she began to feel trapped in a shadow she could not escape. James, meanwhile, noticed the change in her demeanor. At first, he attributed it to stress at work, but subtle signs of anxiety began to erode his patience. Rachel's smiles grew forced, her laughter hollow. At dinner, she would pause, staring into her plate, lost in thought. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked one evening, his voice softer than usual. She brushed him off, claiming exhaustion. Yet the tension between them thickened, a silent wall rising in the middle of their once perfect home. Unable to ignore the pull any longer, Rachel agreed to meet Michael. The coffee shop they chose was dimly lit, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore, the kind of place where people could sit unseen for hours. Rain splashed against the windows as Rachel entered, and she felt the old adrenaline spike in her chest. Michael was already there, seated at a corner table, his eyes locking onto hers with a mix of nostalgia and something darker. Obsession, perhaps. "Rachel," he whispered as she approached, his voice both familiar and menacing. She sat, hands trembling slightly, the hum of the espresso machine filling the silence. They spoke cautiously at first, memories of college life resurfacing like old wounds. Laughter came easily at first, but as the minutes passed, tension built. Michael's glances lingered too long, fingers brushing hers briefly, sending shivers of guilt and fear through her body. The more she tried to detach, the more her emotions betrayed her. She wanted to leave, to run back to James, to the safe life she had fought so hard to construct. But a part of her, the part that had been swept away by Michael's charisma years ago, remained vulnerable, responsive, dangerously curious. And Michael, perceptive as ever, seemed to sense it. "You can't pretend we never mattered," he murmured, leaning closer. His tone was intimate, coercive, almost hypnotic. Rachel pulled back, heart pounding, feeling both drawn and repulsed. Returning home that night felt like crossing a threshold into unease. The rain had stopped, but the streets seemed darker, more menacing. Every shadowed corner made her jump. She knew she was treading a dangerous line, betrayal of her husband, of the life she had built, and yet a magnetic pull she could not deny. Her phone buzzed again with a message from Michael. "Meet me tonight. There's something you need to know, something that could change everything." James, unaware of the full depth of her turmoil, watched her as she sat silently on the couch. "You okay?" he asked again, concern etching lines across his forehead. Rachel nodded, forcing a smile, but the hollow sound of it made her stomach churn. The tension between the past and the present, between desire and duty, had become a living, breathing thing in her home. The night grew longer, each second stretched by anticipation and fear. Rachel realized that Michael's return was no accident, that his intrusion into her life had purpose, and that purpose carried danger far beyond emotional entanglement. She felt the first real pangs of fear for herself, for James, for Lily, and for the fragile illusion of safety that Maplewood had once offered. As she placed her phone on the nightstand, Rachel froze. Another message appeared, this time more ominous. "If you don't meet me, someone innocent will pay the price." The tension in the Whitmore household had become almost tangible. James noticed the subtle changes first. Rachel's laughter no longer reached her eyes, her hands lingered too long on her phone, and she flinched at every unexpected knock on the door. At dinner, she picked at her food, barely touching it, while James tried to mask the growing unease he felt creeping under his skin. "Rachel, is something going on?" he asked one evening, trying to sound casual, but the sharpness in his tone betrayed him. Rachel forced a smile, the practiced expression of normalcy she had perfected over years of social interactions. "I'm fine, James. Just tired," she replied, her voice a touch too soft, but her eyes avoided his, darting to the window as if searching for an invisible threat outside. The unspoken tension hung between them like a heavy curtain, and James sensed it, a subtle warning that something in their lives was about to unravel. Later that night, alone in their bedroom, Rachel's thoughts were consumed by Michael. She tried to rationalize the encounters, the messages, the way her heart had betrayed her. But rationalization offered little solace. Each memory of Michael's gaze, each whispered word from their meeting, carved deeper lines of guilt and fear into her mind. She wanted to bury it all, pretend it had never happened, yet she could not. The pull of the past was insidious, and the consequences of ignoring it were growing more ominous with each passing day. Meanwhile, James had begun his own quiet investigation. Suspicion gnawed at him, fueled by the inconsistencies he could no longer ignore. He noticed deleted messages on Rachel's phone, a series of calls that seemed to vanish into thin air, and her increasingly erratic excuses for outings and errands. The perfect facade he had trusted was cracking. One night, he followed her discreetly, keeping to the shadows, heart pounding with a mix of fear and betrayal. Rachel, unaware of the surveillance, met Michael at a secluded parking lot. The rain had stopped, leaving wet leaves that clung to the asphalt. Michael's voice was urgent, almost desperate. "Rachel, you don't understand. Everything I'm telling you is important. It affects all of us." She nodded, fearful, yet compelled to listen, her loyalty to James warring with the need to protect herself from the man who haunted her past. Back home, James discovered more than he expected. In the glove compartment of their car, he found a hotel receipt, a place neither of them had claimed to visit. His chest tightened as he processed the implications. It was proof of betrayal, yet it was only a fragment of a larger, more sinister puzzle he did not yet see. The seed of distrust had been planted, and the roots were growing rapidly. That night, tension filled the Whitmore bedroom like a living presence. James stared at Rachel across the bed, the unease in his eyes mirrored by the walls around them. "Rachel, I know something's wrong," he said quietly, almost pleading. She avoided his gaze, a subtle shaking of her head betraying her inner turmoil. She told the first lie. "It's nothing, James." "Really? Just work stress. But lies have weight, and this one pressed down on her chest like a leaden cloak. She knew that this small deception could not contain the truth forever. The first crack in their perfect life had appeared, fragile yet devastating, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Later that night, as James drifted into a restless sleep, Rachel's phone buzzed on the nightstand. A new message glowed on the screen, sending a chill down her spine. "You can't hide anymore. I'm closer than you think." The days after James's confrontation with Rachel were heavy with unspoken words. Maplewood's streets, usually familiar and comforting, seemed suddenly alien, the shadows longer, the air thicker. Rachel tried to move through her routines as if nothing had changed, but every glance over her shoulder reminded her that Michael was still out there, still a living threat from the past she had tried so desperately to bury. One afternoon, Lily begged to play at the park near their home. Rachel hesitated, the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. Reluctantly, she agreed, forcing herself to smile, convincing her daughter and herself that everything was fine. But as she watched Lily swing, laughter ringing in the crisp air, Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Movement from the edge of the park caught her eye. A man, familiar yet out of place, lingered near the trees. Michael. Time seemed to slow. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just watched. Rachel's stomach twisted into knots. She wanted to run, to grab Lily and flee, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She recognized him instantly, the same piercing gaze, the slight smirk, the aura of danger she had known in college. Memories flooded back, stolen moments in empty lecture halls, whispered confessions in rainy parking lots, nights where laughter had masked obsession. Michael had been a part of her past, and now, impossibly, he had invaded her present. Heart-pounding, Rachel pulled Lily close and left the park, insisting on an early dinner. She avoided telling James about the sighting. He didn't need another reason to worry, she reasoned, and she feared his anger more than the danger she faced. But hiding the truth did not shield her from the dread gnawing at her. That night, she sat alone on the back porch, staring at the darkened streets, imagining Michael walking among them, invisible, patient, planning. The tension seeped into her interactions with friends, too. At a routine meeting with Marissa, her confidant, Rachel's unease was palpable. She confessed fragments of what had happened, careful to omit the sighting at the park. Marissa's concern was immediate. "Rachel, this isn't just old feelings coming back." "He's escalating. You have to take this seriously," she warned. Rachel nodded, but fear had frozen her into inaction. Meanwhile, James's suspicion continued to grow. He noticed her distracted glances, the occasional flinch at a ringing phone, the way she avoided him during conversations. He couldn't yet comprehend the full scope of her fear, but instinct told him that something from her past had returned to threaten the fragile stability of their family. Rachel's anxiety reached a fever pitch one evening when another message appeared on her phone, this one chillingly precise. "If you don't meet me tonight, someone innocent will get hurt." Her heart skipped a beat, a cold wave washing over her. She knew he meant Lily. She knew the stakes had shifted. What had once been an emotional entanglement had become a tangible, imminent threat. The echoes of the past were no longer whispers. They were pounding on the walls of her life. She realized with sickening clarity that the past she thought she had escaped was now asserting itself in every corner of her present. Every decision, every lie, every moment of hesitation could have consequences she was not prepared to face. As Rachel sat in her car that night, parked just a block from the familiar street where Lily played, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around, heart racing, expecting Michael. But it was Marissa, eyes wide with fear. "He's closer than you think," Marissa whispered, "and he's not stopping for anything." Rachel's phone buzzed violently in the cup holder. A new message appeared. "I've been waiting for you. Tonight, we settle this, one way or another." The Whitmore house had never felt so claustrophobic. Even the cheerful beige walls, the framed family photos, and the polished wooden floors seemed to press in on James and Rachel, as though aware of the secrets simmering beneath their carefully maintained facade. After Rachel's chilling encounter at the park, James became increasingly restless. The nagging sense that something was wrong could no longer be ignored. Each evening, he watched Rachel, noticing the nervous flick of her eyes toward the phone, the way she hesitated before answering, the subtle tension in her shoulders. One afternoon, James made a decision. He called a private investigator, a discreet man named Daniel who specialized in domestic surveillance. Daniel arrived a few days later, inconspicuous and professional, and began his quiet, meticulous work. Cameras were placed where needed, cars were followed, phone records traced, and habits carefully cataloged. For James, it was both reassuring and terrifying. Finally, he would know the truth, yet the act of seeking it felt like opening a door that might never be closed. Meanwhile, Rachel's life became a delicate balancing act of fear and denial. She tried to maintain appearances, drive Lily to school, attend PTA meetings, and smile at neighbors, all while a storm of anxiety brewed beneath the surface. Michael's messages continued to arrive, each one sharper and more insistent than the last. He was no longer merely an echo from her past. He was an active presence, orchestrating his return into her life with precision. The first proof of betrayal came unexpectedly. Daniel handed James a folder filled with photographs. Rachel and Michael at a nondescript motel, their expressions carefree, intimate, and entirely unaware of the danger that surrounded them. James stared at the images, disbelief and fury warring within him. The perfect life he had built with Rachel was cracking, and these photographs were the first tangible evidence that the facade had been pierced. At the same time, Lily's innocence began to fracture. She noticed her mother's tension, the whispered phone calls, and the sudden cancellations of playdates. One afternoon, she wrote in her diary about the man who scares mommy, a reference Rachel could not ignore. It became painfully clear that Michael's obsession was no longer just Rachel's burden. It had begun to infiltrate the safety of their child's world. The Whitmores tried to maintain their routines, but the suburb itself seemed complicit in the tension. Neighbors watched too closely, streets felt narrower, and the sunlight outside the windows was cold and unforgiving. Each moment, each interaction, carried the undercurrent of fear, the knowledge that someone outside their home knew too much, and that someone dangerous had been observing them for weeks. By nightfall, James and Rachel sat in silence, the weight of the day pressing down like a leaden blanket. Neither spoke of the motel photos or Michael's stalking, but both understood the unspoken truth. Their family was under siege. The shadows of the past had entered their home, and no amount of denial could protect them. That night, James's phone buzzed with a cryptic email. The subject line read simply, "I've been watching Lily." Attached was a single photograph. Lily asleep in her room. James felt his stomach drop, and Rachel's hand trembled as she reached for his. The threat had crossed a boundary, and the suburban idol they had trusted was gone forever. Maplewood's quiet streets had long been a symbol of safety and comfort for its residents, but for the Whitmores, the familiar sidewalks and trimmed lawns had become sources of paranoia. Every passing car, every fluttering curtain, felt like an intrusion. James and Rachel were trapped in a subtle war of observation and fear. And yet, outside their immediate awareness, a critical piece of the puzzle was waiting to surface. It began with a knock at the door late one evening. Mrs. Hargrove, their next-door neighbor and longtime friend, stood on the porch, her expression tense, eyes darting nervously down the street. "James, Rachel, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low, urgent. She invited them inside, and over the hum of the kitchen light, the confession began. Mrs. Hargrove revealed that she had been observing Michael long before anyone else had noticed. "I thought it was nothing at first," she admitted, wringing her hands. "Just a man visiting a friend. But then I saw him near your house, more than once. He was taking pictures, sometimes watching Lily through the windows." Rachel's face went pale, her hand instinctively covering Lily's empty bedroom door. James felt a rush of protective anger mixed with helpless dread. The neighbor continued, detailing the subtle signs she had ignored for weeks. A shadow outside the window late at night, a car parked too long on the corner, a stranger who appeared to know the Whitmores' schedules. Mrs. Hargrove's tone wavered with guilt. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't want to interfere, but I was wrong." As she spoke, the Whitmores realized the depth of the surveillance Michael had already conducted. Every secret Rachel thought she had hidden, every routine James assumed was private, had been exposed to a man whose obsession had evolved into something terrifyingly meticulous. The photos, the hotel visits, the persistent messages, all pieces of a larger puzzle that had been quietly forming behind the thin walls of Maplewood's perfect veneer. James, heart-hammering, demanded specifics. Mrs. Hargrove hesitated, then produced a small USB drive from her coat pocket. "I didn't know what to do with this," she admitted. "I saved it just in case. But you need to see it." Hesitant fingers handed the drive to James, who stared at it, an ominous sense of foreboding settling in his chest. Plugging it into his laptop, the couple watched in stunned silence. The videos were clear and chilling. Lily asleep in her room, unaware of the camera capturing her, her innocence stolen by a lens and the man who lurked behind it. James felt bile rise in his throat, Rachel's hand trembling as she gripped his arm. It was undeniable proof that Michael's obsession had escalated far beyond the emotional manipulation they had feared. He had crossed a line that no parent should ever confront. The confessions and evidence brought clarity, but clarity came with terror. The past that Rachel had tried to leave behind had been carefully, patiently, and obsessively resurrected, and the Whitmores were now fully aware that danger was immediate and personal. It was no longer a threat lurking in shadows. It was real, measurable, and aimed directly at their daughter. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want this to happen, but now you know. You have to act. You can't wait any longer." James and Rachel exchanged a glance, a shared understanding passing silently between them. The time for caution, for denial, was over. The stakes had risen beyond marital lies and secret encounters. Michael's obsession had become a direct threat to their family's survival. That night, as they fortified doors and checked locks, a single message appeared on Rachel's phone, glowing on the screen like a predator's watchful eye. "You're not safe. Not even here." The storm had arrived in more ways than one. Outside, heavy rain lashed against the windows of Michael's apartment, turning the city streets into rivers of reflection. Inside, tension crackled like electricity. Rachel had tried to sever the connection to protect her family, but Michael's obsession had become a living, breathing force. She knew she could no longer ignore the danger, yet confronting it felt like stepping into a predator's lair. Earlier that evening, Rachel had agreed, reluctantly, to meet Michael one last time. The cafe, the park, the muted familiarity of their previous encounters were gone. This was different. It was private, intense, unavoidable. Michael's apartment was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, a single lamp casting shadows across the room. He was waiting, eyes glinting with something Rachel couldn't quite name. Equal parts love, rage, and madness. "Rachel," he said, voice low and urgent, "you don't understand. You left me, but I can't let you go. You belong to me, to us, to everything we shared." Her pulse raced, every instinct screaming that this man was no longer the boy she had once loved. He leaned closer, his hands brushing hers in a touch that was intimate, invasive, and terrifying. "I can't do this anymore, Michael," she whispered, pulling back, her voice shaking. "I have a family. I have James. I have Lily. You have to leave us alone." But Michael did not move. His gaze was unyielding, unrelenting. The man who had once been charming had been replaced by someone whose obsession had metastasized into danger. "I won't," he said simply, almost calmly. "And if you try to run, if you try to protect them from me, someone will get hurt. You know I can't let that happen." Rachel swallowed hard, her mind racing. This was no longer a game of emotions. This was a calculated threat, a declaration of intent. She had underestimated the depth of his obsession, and now her family was in its crosshairs. Rachel fled the apartment in a blur of rain-soaked streets and pounding heartbeats, driving home with a sense of urgency she had never known. Every turn, every shadow seemed to hide Michael's presence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as if sheer force could keep him at bay. By the time she pulled into the driveway of the Whitmore home, the storm outside had become a mirror of the turmoil inside. Chaotic, relentless, unstoppable. Inside, James was waiting, pacing, Worry etched across his face. He saw Rachel's disheveled appearance and immediately understood that the danger had escalated. "He's back," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's not just obsessed. He's dangerous." James felt a shiver run down his spine. He had suspected danger, but the magnitude of Michael's intent was now undeniable. The couple began fortifying their home, locking doors, checking windows, and setting up every precaution they could imagine. But they both knew it was only a temporary measure. Michael's obsession could not be contained by locks and alarms alone. The psychological weight of his presence hung over them, invisible, yet suffocating. That night, the first act of physical danger arrived. A crash downstairs made their hearts leap. James grabbed a flashlight, moving cautiously toward the noise, only to find the back door ajar, its lock broken. Michael had been inside, leaving behind evidence of his intrusion. A single chilling note. "I love you, and I'll destroy anyone who gets in my way." The reality was undeniable. The threat had moved from emotional manipulation and surveillance to direct action. Rachel's worst fears were realized. Michael's obsession was no longer something they could reason with or evade. It had become violent, tangible, and personal. James's phone rang just as they tried to call the police. The screen flashed Michael's number. A distorted voice whispered from the other end, "I warned you." And now, the game begins. The following morning felt unreal. Rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under a pale sun. But inside the Whitmore home, tension clung like a thick fog. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, fingers trembling as she held her mug of coffee. The night's events had left her physically exhausted but mentally alert, a constant, nagging awareness of Michael's presence, his obsession, and the terrifying reality that he might strike again at any moment. James entered silently, his expression unreadable. He had spent the night awake, pacing the living room, replaying every detail, every warning, every subtle sign he had overlooked. The photographs, the hotel receipts, the messages. They had painted a picture of Rachel's secret life, but now, combined with Michael's violent intrusion, they formed a horror too sharp to ignore. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "James, I need to tell you everything," she whispered, eyes fixed on the chipped mug in her hands. Her voice trembled, a mixture of guilt, fear, and a desperate need for absolution. She recounted each secret meeting with Michael, every lingering glance, every message she had ignored or deleted. She spoke of the park encounter, the coffee shop meeting, and the note he had left after breaking into their home. Each confession cut deeper, exposing truths James had suspected but did not fully understand. James listened, a storm of emotion crossing his face. Betrayal, fear, confusion, and an undercurrent of love that had not yet died. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, his voice tight with emotion. Rachel shook her head, tears streaming. "I was scared. I thought I could handle it. I wanted to protect you. And Lily. But I was wrong." The gravity of her admissions settled over them, heavy and suffocating. The past that Rachel had hoped to bury had returned with vengeance, and now it threatened to dismantle everything they had built. Yet, in the middle of the fear and anger, a strange clarity emerged. Honesty, though painful, was the only way to begin confronting the threat Michael posed. The conversation shifted when James called the police, explaining the situation in painstaking detail. Detectives arrived, notebooks in hand, asking questions about Michael's behavior, his history, and Rachel's encounters. It was here that the full scope of Michael's obsession began to crystallize. He was not simply an emotionally manipulative ex-lover. He had a calculated streak, using surveillance, threats, and now direct action to assert control over Rachel and intimidate the family. As the investigation unfolded, Rachel admitted the last pieces she had withheld, including the motel visits and deleted messages. James realized the severity of the danger. They were not only dealing with a past romance turned toxic, but with a man whose fixation had evolved into criminal intent. The betrayal of secrecy was one thing. The looming threat to Lily's safety was another entirely. Amidst this chaos, a chilling revelation emerged. The lead detective asked a question that made both James and Rachel freeze. "Do you know if Michael was married?" Rachel shook her head, but James's brow furrowed in suspicion. The detective continued, "Because he was, and his spouse lives here in Maplewood." This complicates matters. His obsession may not be limited to Rachel. The room went cold. The ramifications were staggering. Michael's network of personal entanglements extended farther than they had imagined, and the potential for harm was exponentially greater than they had anticipated. Their confrontation with the past was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As James and Rachel processed this revelation, Rachel's phone buzzed again. A text appeared from the unknown number, icy and direct. "You thought confessing would save you. It won't. Tonight, the truth will demand a price." The revelation of Michael's connections shook the Whitmores to their core. Rachel sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly, while James stared out the rain-speckled window, mind racing with every scenario of what might come next. Their home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fortress under siege. Every shadow outside the blinds seemed a threat. Every car engine revving on the street made them flinch. The danger was no longer abstract. It was immediate, pervasive, and terrifyingly close. Amidst the chaos, a knock at the door startled them. Neither James nor Rachel expected visitors, and the sound was sharper in the tension-filled silence. Cautiously, James opened the door to reveal a man in his late 40s, neatly dressed, with a calm but serious demeanor. "Detective Allen," he introduced himself. "I was assigned to your case a few weeks ago, but there were complications." "I think I can help." Rachel blinked, unsure whether to trust him. "We already have detectives," she said, voice wavering. "Why now?" Allen stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. "Because I know something your local investigators don't," he replied. "Michael has a history that goes beyond obsession. He's meticulous, calculating, and he's been in situations before where people disappeared or were intimidated into silence. I've been tracking him for years, a pattern of manipulation and escalation. You need more than standard police procedures. You need strategy." James and Rachel exchanged a glance, a mix of relief and apprehension. Finally, someone with knowledge of Michael's darker patterns. Someone who understood that this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a psychological storm that required precise navigation. Allen explained that Michael had an intricate network of contacts, including past acquaintances, online followers, and a few associates who unknowingly facilitated his surveillance. "He studies his targets meticulously," Allen said. "He anticipates moves, predicts reactions, and uses fear as a weapon. You can't fight him alone." Over the next hours, he laid out a plan. Surveillance cameras, counter-tracking measures, and secure communication channels would be implemented immediately. The Whitmores' routines would be altered, and new strategies would protect Lily, the most vulnerable. Allen also emphasized psychological preparation. Rachel and James would need to anticipate manipulations, remain calm under provocation, and avoid feeding into Michael's obsession. Rachel listened, absorbing every word like a lifeline. The weight of guilt she carried for her past indiscretions felt slightly lighter now, replaced by a focus on action, on defense, on survival. She realized that confession alone had not been enough. The stakes demanded allies, strategy, and courage. As night fell, Allen accompanied James and Rachel to inspect the perimeter of the house. They checked doors, reinforced windows, and mapped escape routes, all while maintaining vigilance for any signs of Michael. The air was thick with tension, every sound magnified in the quiet suburban night. It was the calm before the storm, and the Whitmores felt the gravity of the battle to come. Yet, in the midst of fear and uncertainty, a subtle shift occurred. Having an ally, someone who understood Michael's patterns and methods, gave them a sense of direction. For the first time in weeks, there was a thread of hope woven into the dread. As Alan left for the night, Rachel's phone buzzed once again. She froze, heart pounding, and read the message. "You think you're prepared? I've been waiting. Tonight, the real test begins." The night was thick with tension. Rain pelted the Whitmore windows, the sound masking the quiet panic that gripped Rachel and James. Detective Allen had set up perimeter cameras, checked locks, and established secure lines of communication, but the sense of inevitability remained. Michael's obsession was no longer confined to surveillance or threats. It had transformed into a calculated assault on both his target and everyone tied to them. It began with a knock at the front door, sharp, insistent, almost theatrical. James's hand went to the baseball bat he kept by the entryway, muscles taut, while Rachel clutched Lily's hand. Detective Allen's voice came through the intercom. "Stay calm. Don't open it. He's testing you." But the damage had already begun. The psychological warfare, the fear, the suspense, the knowledge that someone with malicious intent was so close had started to erode the Whitmores' composure. Then came the call. Michael's distorted voice whispered from the phone line, "You can't hide from me. Your perfect little life is mine to ruin." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Lily's innocent sobs punctuated the tension, and James felt a surge of protective fury. They knew this was no longer about emotional manipulation. It was about control, dominance, and the devastating power of obsession unchecked. The first domino fell within hours. A call from Lily's school revealed that another child, whose parents were friends of Michael's, had been threatened. Fear rippled outward, exposing cracks in other households, showing that Michael's reach extended far beyond the Whitmores. The image of his obsession as a private vendetta was shattered. It was a contagion, a destructive force that could topple lives indiscriminately. As the night stretched on, James and Rachel realized the full scope of the crisis. Their secrets, Rachel's past indiscretions, and Michael's relentless pursuit had combined into a perfect storm. The Whitmores' relationship strained under the pressure. Arguments erupted, sharp, desperate, and raw, as years of buried fears, mistrust, and guilt collided with the immediate threat. For the first time, James questioned everything he had assumed about trust, loyalty, and love. Simultaneously, Michael's own life began to unravel. The careful control he maintained over his image and surroundings began to falter. Past partners, acquaintances, and even family members came forward, revealing pieces of his violent and obsessive tendencies. Two families, Michael's and the Whitmores, were caught in a spiraling collision of obsession, guilt, and fear. The destruction was not isolated. It reverberated outward, leaving emotional carnage in its wake. Detective Allen worked tirelessly, coordinating with law enforcement, tracking Michael's movements, and establishing protective measures for the Whitmores. Yet he admitted grimly that containment was never guaranteed. Michael's obsession was adaptive, unpredictable, and deeply personal, a force that would not yield easily. In the quiet moments between the chaos, Rachel and James sat together in the living room, drenched from rain and fear, holding Lily close. The realization struck them both. Perfection was a fragile illusion, easily shattered by secrets and unrestrained desire. Two families, the Whitmores, whose lives had once seemed invulnerable, and Michael's, whose own dysfunction had fueled his obsession, were now irrevocably fractured. By dawn, the storm outside had begun to ease, but the emotional tempest lingered. Maplewood streets glistened with water, but the sense of safety, of normalcy, had vanished. Neighbors whispered, children played cautiously, and the Whitmores began the slow, painful process of rebuilding, not just their home, but their trust, their sense of security, and their understanding of love and vulnerability. Michael's final message arrived as the first sunlight crept into the Whitmores' home. You think this is over? Obsession never dies. I'll see you again, whether you like it or not. The storm had passed, but its impact lingered like a shadow over the Whitmore household. Maplewood's streets glistened under the soft morning sun, yet the once cheerful suburban neighborhood felt unfamiliar, alien even. The air was heavy with the residue of fear, mistrust, and secrets. Rachel, James, and Lily moved through the home cautiously, acutely aware that although Michael had disappeared from immediate view, his presence remained embedded in their memories and their daily routines. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the weight of recent confessions pressing on her chest. She stared at her hands, fingers intertwined, thinking of the path that had brought them here, her youthful indiscretions, the rekindling of a dangerous past, the lies that had strained the very fabric of their family. Each revelation had exacted a toll, leaving her heart raw and fragile. The knowledge that her actions had endangered Lily gnawed at her relentlessly. She had survived, but at a cost far greater than she had imagined. James paced the living room, the tension in his shoulders gradually easing but not vanishing. Detective Allen had assured them that Michael was now under investigation, that surveillance and protective measures would remain in place, and that the family was as safe as possible for the moment. Yet James knew instinctively that security was only part of the solution. Trust, the invisible foundation of their marriage, had been fractured. He looked at Rachel, seeing the same mixture of guilt, fear, and hope mirrored in her eyes. Healing would take longer than any protective measure could guarantee. The first steps toward recovery were small but deliberate. James and Rachel sat together to rebuild routines. Breakfast with Lily, bedtime stories, and even cautious walks around the block. The simplicity of ordinary life became a balm, each ritual reinforcing the fragile sense of normalcy they so desperately sought. Yet the specter of Michael's obsession lingered like a ghost, reminding them that vigilance had become an inseparable part of their existence. Neighbors, once distant observers, now offered support and concern. Mrs. Hargrove, whose earlier confession had revealed critical clues, checked in daily. Her presence, though well-meaning, was a constant reminder of how close danger had come and how fragile the illusion of safety truly was. Conversations with friends and community members were tinged with careful discretion. Everyone had learned that secrets and obsessions could shatter the facade of perfection in an instant. Despite the external support, the internal scars ran deep. Rachel found herself replaying Michael's words, the intrusion into their home and the threatening messages late at night. Sleep was intermittent, punctuated by nightmares where shadows morphed into Michael's figure. James wrestled with his anger, frustration, and lingering suspicion, questioning how easily an outsider had infiltrated their lives and shaken the family to its core. Yet in the midst of this emotional wreckage, small victories emerged. Lily's laughter returned, tentative but genuine, signaling that innocence could endure even in the face of trauma. Rachel and James, through late-night conversations and quiet confessions, began to reconstruct the trust that had been broken. It was not instantaneous, but each shared story, each apology, each expression of understanding became a brick in the slow rebuilding of their family. Even so, one undeniable truth remained. Michael's obsession, though temporarily checked, had left an indelible mark. The Whitmores understood that some threats do not simply vanish. They linger as shadows, shaping decisions, perspectives, and emotions in ways both subtle and profound. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the awareness of vulnerability persisted, a quiet, unshakable reminder of the events that had nearly destroyed them. As Rachel closed the curtains one evening and tucked Lily into bed, her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A message appeared from an unknown number. "You can run, you can hide, but some obsessions never end." Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she stared at the screen, realizing that though the storm had passed, its echo would haunt them forever. Maplewood had returned to its quiet, sunlit streets, yet for the Whitmores, peace was fragile, a delicate illusion that could shatter with the slightest sound. Life had resumed its routines: school drop-offs, weekend breakfasts, and bedtime stories. Lily's laughter filled the rooms once more, tentative but real, a beacon of resilience amid the wreckage. But James and Rachel both knew that the storm they had survived left scars invisible to the world, scars etched deep into the psyche. Even with Detective Allen's guidance and the protective measures still in place, the shadow of Michael lingered. It was in the sudden chill of a night breeze, the unfamiliar car parked too long on a corner, the ringing of a phone that might deliver a threat instead of a call. They had learned that obsession rarely dies quietly. It festers, waiting for cracks to exploit, patience weaponized into terror. Rachel, once confident and carefree, now moved with caution, hyper-aware of every step, every interaction. James carried a vigilance that was almost instinctual, monitoring every call, every visitor, every minor disruption as potential danger. And yet, in the midst of this vigilance, they found a new kind of strength, a partnership forged in fear and survival, tempered by honesty, trust, and the relentless determination to protect the life they had rebuilt. The neighborhood seemed calm, ordinary even, but whispers of Michael's past actions lingered. Other families had been affected, and his network of obsession had left invisible ripples, a chilling reminder that danger could strike anywhere, at any time. For Rachel and James, it was no longer enough to simply live. They had to anticipate, prepare, and endure, forever aware that their survival was not guaranteed. And then came the message. A text, anonymous and chilling, appearing on Rachel's phone one quiet evening. "You survived once, but I never forget. I'll be watching." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a promise, that some obsessions never die, and some shadows never fade. As Rachel held Lily close and James stood guard at the window, one truth became clear. The Whitmores had survived the storm, but they had been forever changed. In a world where betrayal can strike under the guise of love, where obsession can twist into terror, one lesson remained: vigilance is eternal, and the past, no matter how deeply buried, can always return.